that someone make a motion to draft and approve a resolution that will allow ordinances today to be read by title only. So moved. Have that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Have a second.
Yeah, I just want to go.
Any discussion on that? Okay, all in favor of the question to
Yeah, we're not going to read it.
resolution to allow ordinances to be read by title only, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Not one person
Motion's approved unanimously. All right,
goes.
thank you.
Thank you.
The motion's
You're welcome.
approved unanimously.
Well, let's move on then to the last business item we have, which is ordinance 351, which is amending Trimet Code 29 and updating our procedures. I'm probably reading the title here. So
I can't watch this with Neil
this
today
is the
because I'm
second
actually
reading. I want to make clear
in
to folks
Indianapolis at the
in the
moment.
audience that's meant to
But I wanted
clearly
to
detail
see
the
this.
agency's existing authority to require and inspect fares. And I'd like to turn to Trimet General Counsel Shelley Devine for a reading of this ordinance by title only.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Board President.
Yes, we're going to get the
Ordinance number
Gestapo
351
on
of the
you,
Tri-County
and we're going to
Metropolitan
tell
Transportation
you
District of Oregon,
that this
amending
is
Trimet Code
constitutional,
Chapter
even
29
though
and
a
updating
judge
procedures
has
for
said
requests
it's
for
not,
proof of
but
payment.
because
This is the
we're
second reading.
unaccountable
Thank
technocrats,
you very
we
much.
can do this.
So, board members, you are aware of what these changes to our code means.
Now, let's
and
see.
I think Eric
I thought Kathy
made a-
Ray sold
did a
us
really
out
good
because
job
she voted
at our
yes.
last board meeting of outlining those changes and the need for it at our last board meeting. We did hold a public hearing at our last meeting on
Yeah.
the first reading where we heard testimony from the public. We had a lot of, I think, good discussion. between
Yeah,
the
right, a
board
lot of
members
good
on this-
discussion.
on this item. And there was, while we moved forward with to bring this ordinance to this date, there was some question around the need to have further outreach, and we specifically asked staff to go back and talk with TIAC and get some
Yeah,
some
right,
feedback
sure.
from
See
them.
how they just
And I'd
lie
like
to your
call
face,
up,
just
John
like
Gardner, the
who
Director of
else we
Diversity and
know.
Transit Equity, to go
He just
over
lies
what
to your
he's heard
face.
from TIAC and others, and then maybe if Eric's heard anything that we should get on the record, we ought to have him come up after John, all right?
Yeah,
Guess he's
right.
coming
We already
up.
know this past five
Good morning,
nothing.
President Warner and members
So,
of
here's Gardner.
the... So we put together a slide to talk
The
to show you a little bit
Obama
more about the
character
outreach,
of
but before I go
Trimet.
into that, I want to give
You
you a
know,
little
the
bit more
black sellout
context
elitist.
and history on the work we've done with TIAC and other groups over the last 3 years. So for the last 3 years, Trimet and our community partners have been working across multiple coalitions to decriminalize fare
Okay,
enforcement.
we'll give them
and
credit
greater
for it. See,
equity
this is
and
what really
transparency to our
strikes it
safety
odd
and
to me
security
about
efforts. I think
the
you previously
Trimet
heard that
people.
in
Is how, on the one hand, they tell bus drivers to forget about the fares, which I give them credit for. And on the other hand, they want to send Nazis in on the train. So there's some kind of a schizophrenia going on here.
But in that time,
It's like on the one hand, they want to decriminalize, but on the other hand, they want the police state. But when you really think about it, what you understand is that this is actually a police state function. It's not. This is the police state putting its will on Trimet to control the public.
to ensure folks were not being excluded.
see, look
Their
at all
only
this crap
penalty was
here.
fare evasion. We also worked with the state legislature, mostly Eric
Yeah,
and a lot of community
yeah,
partners,
you-
to reduce the presumptive fine from $175 to lower it to $75 that we have today. We work with Multnomah,
Yeah.
Clackamas, and Washington counties.
fine
and the
should be
legislature to
$25
separate
like it
fare
is in
citations
Boston.
From the regional court system
This
to allow
is
90
not
days
a
for
fair system. I don't care
resolution.
what they say it
We
is.
also worked to allow folks to sign up for the low-income fare program. if
And they
the
should have put in
rescinded.
fare gates
We also
at the
worked to
stations.
allow for community service
Because
for the
at the
first time in
MBTA,
6
they have
years
somebody
in
watching to
order,
see
instead of paying a
if
fine.
you're going through
And
the
we
fare
also
gates
developed in
properly.
partnership with the Safety and Security Subcommittee of TIAC, a new training module that staff are building out right now that has over 50 hours of diversity,
Oh,
cultural
geez.
sensitivity, trauma-informed care, civil rights, and equity
He
training as part
just
of the
he just
curriculum.
spouts off this
So we have a long
neoliberal
history of
garbage.
working with our community partners
You
to
know,
make sure that our system is fair, it's transparent, and it's responsive.
transparent, my
So
ass.
what you see before you now is a list of, first on the right side, TIAC members, Transit Equity Advisory Committee members, and on the left, a subcommittee of TIAC, groups we pulled together last spring to begin having a subcommittee of TIAC specifically for safety and security because it's such a big issue.
Yeah, right.
And as part of our outreach, as we said, I think at the last meeting, we were only able to send the ordinance and a little bit of a background to the TIAC members. But in the time since the meeting, we've actually had the opportunity to talk to many of not only the TIAC members, but also members that served on the Safety and Security Subcommittee. Now remember, these are all volunteer organizations whose primary mission, all but I think one, don't really overlap with transportation, besides the fact that many of them serve transit-dependent populations. But the good news is that in keeping with the spirit of the work we've been doing over the last 3 years, the vast majority see this ordinance is the next step. And many of them have been working
What?
on,
The next step to what? To
hoping
allow
we
to
move
have
further and faster on this
Gestapo
years ago.
on
So,
your trains?
The fact that the ordinance further decriminalizes fair enforcement is something we've been working on for years. So just for the record, I guess, the agencies with asterisks on them are ones who have said formally, yes, we support the ordinance.
So not one
The
agency.
ones that
Wait a
don't
minute.
have
Not
asterisks
everybody
have all been
did.
reached
Okay,
out
look.
to, but either they
There
don't
are
have a
ones that
political
said no.
position
Bus
on
Riders
this or a
Unite said
position
no.
at all,
Hacienda
or they
said
just
no.
haven't reached back to
Joint
us.
said no.
The only
Multnomah County
one
Youth
I'd add
said
is
no.
Street Trust is on
Oregon
hiatus 'cause
Food
they don't
Bank
have
said
staff
no.
liaison
Portland
to us
Community
right now.
College said no. Street
Let's see, and
Trust
then so on the
said
safety and
no.
security
Urban League of
group,
Portland. Well,
those
Urban League has
organizations also
been
agree. And I expect to hear
institutionalized
something
with
back from Multnomah
capitalist
County
money.
Disability Services and Multnomah County Mental Health and Substance Abuse today, as
There's
well
quite a few
as
that did
hopefully
not
the Coalition
approve.
of Communities
Look.
of Color. I think a lot of agencies are kind of agnostic.
1,
They're
2,
like, this doesn't
3,
affect us per
4,
se, but
5,
we don't have a
6,
position.
7
So I think
did
the
not
only
approve.
organization
1,
that's
2,
been
3, 4, 5, 6,
unsure and
7, 8,
and
9
or
approved.
maybe a no at this point might be Opal, but that's not surprising. I think they have a long view on this. It's not clear exactly why that is, but the
Why?
agencies that have asterisks, I think if you look at their service and their populations, that's probably about 30 to 50,000 clients that they serve, most of which are minority, low-income,
Yeah, well, they're not the
and some of
clients.
which
They're
have
the
criminal
agencies
histories.
of the clients.
For example, Constructing Hope is a pre-apprenticeship program that primarily serves minorities and African Americans, and many of which who are formerly incarcerated. They love the idea of this ordinance. Because
What
they know
ordinance?
that it's possible they can have a client who writes a system who may not have fare, and
What are
believe
they?
that's
What?
where
See what
the
they're trying to
varsity
do here?
should stop.
They're trying to
And I
paint
believe the
this
ordinance does
as
this.
a.
So, in respect to
See what they're
Director
doing
Way,
now.
I
See
just
what they're
wanted to
doing.
give
They're
you
trying to make this
specifically
sound
a
like this is
snapshot of
part of
some
the
the agencies we've reached out
decriminalization
to.
effort,
We're meeting
when in
with
reality
charities on
it's part of
Friday.
the
I feel really confident
criminalization.
that they
They're
too
turning
should be
reality
able to serve
upside
the
down.
wisdom
Who
of
else do we know
So I feel like this is a
that
really good
turns
start.
reality upside
Essentially, some of
down?
the largest organizations
This is why
that
I
serve our
have such
overlapping
disdain
customers
for
in
our
this
culture,
community.
because while they
So,
concentrate on
that's
one
my question
person
about the outreach.
for
We
turning
also
reality
spoke to
upside
TIAC
down,
again about
they
this last
ignore
night. And
everybody
for the most
else
part, people
doing
are
the
sort of, they
exact
understand
same
it,
thing.
And there weren't a lot of questions. Opal did have a question, have some good questions, but
happened
outside
to
of
his
that,
hair? Look at
Joanne
that
and some of
hair.
The other agencies were kind of like, okay,
Hey,
well,
your hairstyle is
let's
really.
get on to the other.
What is
work
that?
of
Did-
TIAC, so.
So before we get the board questions, maybe Eric, maybe ask you, just remind for anybody watching this, kind of the basics of what this ordinance does do, so there's no confusion about what it does do, and maybe put it's to rest things that people think it doesn't do, so we ought to get that there. And if there's any testimony or any things that we've received that you think we ought to know about, please mention
Testimony.
those.
Sure, happy to do that. So Ordinance 351 does a couple of things. First of all, it makes clear that when fare evasion is the only penalty from an encounter with a person subject to a request for proof of payment, as a result of that encounter, the only penalty will be a fare evasion citation, which is also subject to the 90-day stay that we implemented.
Oh, so they're not trolling. They're not trolling for criminal victims of other things like.
And
But if you don't show your ID, what happens? See?
Restates a number of different findings for the purpose of this statute or this ordinance, as well as the authority for it.
The authority
to make clear that we consider this to be an authorized administrative search.
You do,
much
but
like
not the
kinds
court.
that are conducted at the airport, at the courthouse, and those kinds of facilities.
What?
Related to
What, you
your
wanna
second
frisk
question,
people?
and I'm just going to look at my phone here because I'm not trying to ignore anybody, but we did get an email this morning.
Who's that?
You all got an email that was
City
forwarded
hat,
to me.
Henderson.
This was addressed to
Hey,
the board members from
what are you doing over
Kimberly
there?
McCullough at the ACLU, who has worked with us on our House Bill 2777 committee, the decriminalization efforts from last year. And they apologized for the late notice and said that they had been busy involved in the elections, which delayed their ability to respond. But they did raise a couple of issues that I'll just try and quickly summarize and respond to. They note that Ordinance 351 contains steps forward toward making Trimet's fair enforcement more equitable. We applaud and support the board's apparent efforts to decriminalize the act of failing to carry or provide a valid proof of payment. However, the unconstitutional practices highlighted by Judge Whitmire remain unaddressed,
Right.
according to this
There
email.
you go.
And so they don't think it reaches the goal of altering fair enforcement practices in response to the opinion.
Right.
They then explain a little bit about the opinion and say that while the ordinance appears to be crafted in response to the ruling, it doesn't alter the basic mechanics of Trimet's fair enforcement practices
There you
in any way that relates to what was unconstitutional about their client's case. They again state that they commend what they consider to be further decriminalization. They raise concerns, however, about the situation where someone does not have valid proof of identification or doesn't supply that identification, being not exempt. So if somebody doesn't have proof of fare but doesn't also have ID, there is still the possibility of criminal charges.
Okay, then there you go. See,
and they raise concerns about that issue.
there
which
you
I'll
go.
come back to
So
and
it
address
does
in a
not
second.
change anything.
They don't believe that peace officers should be authorized to inspect fares and issue citations.
Right. Agreed.
They raise concerns about the findings. The finding in 29.5A that says fare collection is essential to Trimet's ability to provide mass transit services. They disagree with
That's
that.
right. It doesn't. It's only
the finding
17%.
that a barrier-free system wouldn't
17% of
eliminate,
revenues.
having a barrier system wouldn't eliminate fair enforcement. They don't think that is the case, and they disagree that a barrier-free system necessarily relies on fair inspection.
Yep. There you go.
And they said, lastly and more fundamentally, as long as Trimet's fair enforcement is intertwined with criminal enforcement
There you go.
and is actually being enforced by or with the help of police officers, it will continue to have an inequitable impact, particularly for the poor, the houseless, individuals with mental health issues, and communities of color.
That's
and
right.
So
I
that sort
agree
of
with them.
concludes the summary of their comments. I'll just quickly respond in a couple of ways. With respect to situations where somebody does not have identification following an encounter and a request for proof of payment, those situations can run on a spectrum from someone who just forgot. We've all probably done this, forgot your wallet in your other jacket or bag or whatever. So range from a very innocent mistake that can typically be resolved to somebody who's intentionally trying to evade detection from law enforcement.
There you go. He just said it.
They probably may have warrants out.
That's
for arrest
what
or
this
some
is
other reason
about.
they
He's
intentionally
admitting it
evade
here.
Detection.
Right.
So we
That's
can
what they're
run
doing
through
there.
that spectrum
They're
and
looking for
between when
people.
someone doesn't have identification following not having proof of payment. And so, and the response to that can also vary depending on which kind of personnel you interact with. Transit police have resources that our staff don't have in terms of different databases. And
See,
ability
so
to
he
search
just
for
admitted that
information
they're
that we discussed
trolling
a
for
little bit last
victims.
time.
He just admitted
So-
it right there.
The intent behind keeping that outside of this ordinance, the no ID situation, we really wanted to make sure that that there were tools available for enforcement in those situations where somebody is intentionally making a conscious decision not to disclose their identity, and that's really where these situations do enter kind of into a criminal area. Typically, if somebody
It's an entrapment
says who they
mechanism.
are
He's
and
admitting it
say
right
law
here.
enforcement,
They have a
here's my
wide
name,
open system with the hope
they can be
of
looked up quickly and
entrapping
written a citation on, and
unsuspecting
all likely
people
they will
into
be
this
on their
net.
way, even without
He's just
identification.
admitted it. He's
It's
just
those
admitted it.
situations again where there's something else going on, and we wanted to make sure that both fair enforcement and law enforcement had some tools to deal with that
Yeah,
situation.
some tools. The same tools
With
they
respect
always
to the
have.
findings, I would only add that in closed systems, BART is a great example. Gated system, a barriered system, they just invested significantly in more fair enforcement staff because people are continuing to
Yes, the
jump
American
the
police
gates there.
state
So,
industrial complex
it is
has
a problem
penetrated
regardless,
every
and it's an
market
issue
because
to
all
which
of these
there are
things
policies and
are not
procedures like this
decided
regardless of
upon
the physical
locally. These are all
layout of
initiatives
the
coming
type of
from
system,
the very top,
that exists,
which
in
is the
physical
federal
layout of the
government.
system. And I think the
which
other
is the
issues
most
really
evil
get down to
institution of
just
our
sort
day, is our
I
federal
think
government,
the
which was
board
not
discussed
supposed to
last,
exist
month, which
under
is,
the
we have a proof of
founding
payment
fathers'
system.
original
Fares are
constitution.
required.
It was
We have a
not
fare
supposed
system,
to be a
and
federal government.
there needs to be some enforcement mechanism for that. And those would be the extent of my responses to the issues raised in that email. I'd be happy to
So
answer
he just
questions.
admitted that it was.
Thank you. So, other questions?
All right, let's see what she
With the
says.
ID situation, if a fair enforcement officer has to make a decision at that moment, let's say someone doesn't have an ID, and I understand it depends on the situation, but what kind of training are we as Trimet, as an agency, providing to these folks on the ground so that there isn't, unintentional harm being done? I guess how do you just
He just admitted that they're intentionally looking for victims. He just admitted
This
that.
person's lying. I think they're, how does someone make the call?
I don't know about specific training. I would only.
They're
answer
police.
Sort of my anecdotal experience.
Do you understand?
having
Police
talked to
don't
enforcement
report to
personnel.
Trimet people.
Again, if they're
The
out there by
police are the
themselves,
police. They
they're
don't
pretty limited
report to
in terms
Trimet.
of the kinds of resources. They'd be limited to our internal database. And the goal here is not, what you want to avoid is a situation where somebody says, my name's John Smith, and you write a citation to John Smith, and you end up with a pile of essentially erroneous citations based on inaccurate information. And so I suspect in certain situations they may contact law enforcement if they believe, based on that information, that this person is not being straightforward. But I don't know specifically how we train them. With
You don't
respect
train them.
to,
They're the police.
At this point, it's over a certain line, and I suspect that may just rest on the sort of experience and observations of the enforcement personnel.
Okay.
So the only thing I'd add
No
is
answer then.
we can share the training outline that the Safety and Security Subcommittee developed, that TAC then approved, that is now being built out. And so when I said the 50 hours, you can see the different elements, and I think you'll see some of the things that satisfy your expectations for just staff awareness of sort of the different situations someone might be
garbage.
in. And the other thing I'd say is, you can check my math on this, but if we're only about 5% of the citations written have police involvement. Right, so if you look at how many citations are written a year, it's maybe 1,200 if I remember the last, out of like 20,000. So the vast majority of interactions when someone gets cited, like 90% or 95%, there's no police involvement because people are just producing what.
Yeah, but it's that other 5%
done the work
that the
to do.
police are looking for,
If they
which is
can
why they have
do
this
community
transit
service
system in the
or
first
sign up for a
place,
program,
to
that
trap
has
those people.
De-escalation sort of implicit in the interaction.
Thank you. Yeah, I think
See,
this
you
is
have to
an area
understand that
still a little
these
gray
government
to me in
agencies
terms of
don't
how,
exist in a vacuum.
individual
They're all
officers
connected,
would,
and their goals are all connected.
I guess, use their best judgment.
No, see,
to,
they're not giving. You need to be
cite
more.
someone or
She's not
based
following up on
proof of
her
ID. But I think maybe something that
original.
might be helpful is also for us to clarify that we can also accept these types of ID, and it's not just official government ID, because I know young people just have their student IDs, or college kids have, their whatever PSU ID. So, and I know that sometimes when people get stopped, they just get scared and,
Yeah, nobody wants. It's like a
not
cop
really
coming
sure
up
which ID
behind
to
you
present, so
in
if
your
you
goddamn
can,
car when you're driving down the road doing
say something
nothing,
like,
and they're
these are
sitting
the
behind
people
you
from
watching
ID,
you, and they
as long as
turn
you're
on
not
the
just who you
lights.
say you are,
It's the exact same
we
thing.
want to
It's
reinforce
police
And it's not policy, but last
Fascists
TAC meeting,
interfering
members
with
were
your
inside
life
explaining where
for
they were
absolutely
stopped.
no
And they showed
$2.50.
library cards.
Yeah.
And that was okay to be used. And I don't think that's the spirit. It's not the rule. And someone even mentioned
Yeah,
the
this
time
is-
where they
this
used
is really
two
some
credit cards
bogus
instead.
shit, okay.
So again, I think the staff that are out there now are at least trying to find ways that that's reasonable, and they weren't going out of their way to say, well, that's not the official Oregon State ID card. So.
I would just add, I think the goal here is always to just get the citation to the right person, right? Otherwise, it's really not worth it.
Yeah, why not get rid of the fares
That is an
completely?
overarching
You want $3 billion to extend this nightmare police state system. Get the $3 billion and make
thank you. And I was
fare-free
also
transit
willing
for the
to
next.
hear,
Let's see,
when that
200
report
million a
came
year.
out,
That's
we,
15
for
years of
folks
fare-free
with multiple
transit. But they're not going to do that.
And we know
You
who
see
some
how
of
this
those
works?
people are, that we as an agency
They're
are
going to keep fooling
doing
the
our due
helpless
diligence to
citizens that
also
can't
reach out
see
to
through this
them
facade.
and just ask, what can we do to help support you? Do you need the low income fare pass? So
No,
I'm
you
glad
shouldn't
that
even
we
be
are
anything.
taking
It's-
that step.
Kick
of
them off the train.
not
That's
just,
what you should do. Get
continuing
out.
to cite certain individuals who
take
keep,
another train.
having this issue, but
I don't
we're
know what you
taking a
should do, but
proactive
this is
stance
not
and
it.
Also looking at it from sort of a social services approach, which is what is it that you need? What is preventing you from paying?
The problem is with our
$2.50,
culture is that being
to
poor
rent?
has been criminalized, and if people don't see that, I can't help you. Okay?
Yes.
I also have some concerns regarding the ID requirement.
This guy's
simply
turning up.
because some folks may have an issue that may be legitimate in regards to divulging their personal information.
Yeah.
And so that's certainly challenging.
It's nobody's
as well.
business. You're riding
I
a
don't know how to
public
resolve
transit.
that.
Imagine if they had like
But I know that
fair
some
sweeps
folks
that
have problems
on a
with
street
presenting
that
their
just
ID with their
stopped you
address
randomly to check your ID.
or
That's
other
basically what they're
personal
doing
information,
here.
You know, like you say,
It's a public
credit card or
transportation
something like that.
system.
So that
Funded
has to
by
be taken into
taxes.
consideration as well. Also, during the last discussion, we had talked about the card distribution or the card that had some language on it. Has that language been modified or has it been changed as well as far as a PR approach?
That is in progress, so I don't think we've landed on anything, but our folks are looking at it and working on it. So we'll
Okay,
have to
yeah, I just wanted the intent of that to be a little bit more welcoming and opening.
Yeah, a little
and,
card,
rather
like
than,
that's going to actually help anything.
an enforcement approach.
Well said.
That's
Is
it?
that it, Director Wishermer? Others?
That's it?
I do have
Please.
a follow-up question for John. John, you said Opal asked some good questions earlier this week. Can you elaborate on what some of those?
Yeah.
I think so Opal has been working with ACLU, so I think their question was really more about the ID.
Okay.
What would have been different in the Valderrama case? And I think at the end of the day, the Valderrama case was not a Trimet with Valderrama. It was a Marion County /
Oh, see how they're see what they're doing? They're trying to push that off them onto. See how these government agencies operate?
Our citations being
They
administrative
like to
in nature,
take the
so that's
blame and
really
push
what
it
this
somewhere else.
ordinance does.
These are
So I think it
very,
further
very
separates
dangerous
us
people here,
from the criminal
okay?
justice system. And I
Because
think
what they
that
do is
both
they
in terms
feed
of
off
intent
the
and
rest
policy,
of us. They're
that then we
actually
can train
they're
to
actually like
So to me,
leeches.
that's the difference.
And their
So
whole
we can
job
sort
is
of
predicated
shift as an
on how
agency
they
to be more of an
abuse
administrative
us, how do they
search,
lie
I
to
guess,
us.
which is again what this ordinance says. The less
Very
likely
dangerous, and
that's
yet
gonna
taxpayers
turn into what
willingly
Director
give
Edwards
them their
says,
money. That's
the
how
more- the sooner
that's
we can
how
get into,
deluded
outreach
our
and
American
education
citizens
campaign
are. They have
about
no
rules for
idea
riding, 'cause
what they're
this
doing. They
ordinance
actually
affects rules for
vote
riding.
yes on
So that'll
tax increases
create
so
greater
that these
awareness for the
people
community from wherever
can
they
get
come
more
about,
money
okay, here's
from
what I can
you. It's
expect from
I
the
never can
Trimet
believe. If you can believe that elections
Just
are
a
real,
final
which I
point on the
sometimes
no
wonder
ID
if
too. I think
if
it's
they're
important
real at
to
all.
know
I
that
mean,
the
they
issue
might
of
be complete
identification is not
fraud
directly
because everything
relevant
else in
to
our life is a
the
fraud.
request
Why
for
would
proof of payment.
elections not
So
be a
what we're
fraud?
focused on is that initial ask, can I see your proof of payment? That's what Ordinance 351 is designed to address. I mean, I think there's
How come nobody's asking? Why don't you just
factors
have
to
one of your
address,
fare
but
inspectors stand
those
on
don't directly
and
address
inspect
that
people's
initial
fare
request for
as they get on the
which is sort
train?
of the narrow thing that
Why?
we're
Why?
attempting to
Nobody even
address in
brings it
this
up. Why don't you just have somebody checking fares as they get on the platform?
That is a latter part of an investigation that would
You know,
begin once
you just go
already
walk
had
through the
someone
platform and then
stopped
check
for proof of
check
payment.
people's fare
So
before they
from
get
a
on it.
constitutional
They won't
perspective,
discuss it. Why not?
Consider them sort of two
Because
separate
that's not the
sort of
point.
issues.
The point is to entrap people.
On that note, I would say what I'm hearing from that is that
Seem too.
once this ordinance,
You know, this is a very insulting. I want to pull what's left of my hair out when I watch these
finish the conversation
elitists
about the implementation side
making
of this,
these
and
decisions for
how
the rest of us,
training and how the actual
and how we are completely locked
exercise
out
of
from
fair
this.
enforcement and the fair enforcement citation
it's just a
process
joke, man.
actually rolls out. And what I'm hearing from my fellow board members is that there is still continued interest in ensuring that the rollout, the implementation affords us the opportunity to ensure that we're keeping the interests of citizens in mind.
Yeah, see how they lie to your face?
No,
You're
that's
not keeping
correct.
their
We
interests of
agreed. So the
citizens in
safety
mind.
and security
You're lying
subcommittee
to
will be
us
meeting in the
like
next few months
somebody
with
else
people
we
of this
know.
building that's very,
Of course, all the media attention is on somebody else, while these bozos get away with lying to us. And I've always theorized that he was sent here to distract us from this. That's the whole reason he showed up, was to keep our minds away from the rest of the stuff that they're doing
that
to
we
us.
would like to put back in front of the Safety and Security Subcommittee. And the plan with that group is to come back to you next spring, next summer, with here's what we've accomplished in partnership with Trimet over the last 6 months. So this is an ongoing process.
You have an elitist talking about how they're going to control us.
Anything else?
That's what you have here.
So
That's
we
disappointing
had the
that,
first reading. We had our
that
public
Kathy
hearing.
didn't,
We've,
was
tasked
weak. She
staff
was
with
weak,
going
so I
out
was
and-
right that
and
she sold
reaching,
us out.
Without the TIAC. and
So that
others
was
who
all
heard
show
back.
on.
We've
That was
also
just a show
heard
for
some
her.
others who provide
She
testimony.
wasn't
They're
for
all,
real.
are
That's a
input
damn
to us. I
shame.
think they're all good. But based on where we are today, and I think where we were is there going to be a motion to adopt this ordinance?
Yeah, well, we never
today
just
as
knew that was
presented,
in
which would mean
question.
it's not an emergency ordinance. It becomes effective 30 days from the date of
But they've
adoption
been
by the board.
doing the illegal fair inspections all along.
Is there
They
a
never
motion?
even paid
So
attention
moved.
to the court
Have a
decision.
motion and a second. Is there any
Second.
further discussion? Please, go ahead. Second. Oh, you're second too. Okay. Any further discussion
You second.
on
Why?
the
There's two
ordinance
people
or
that talked against this.
for today? Seeing that, please.
I'll just say I appreciate John's efforts and
Yeah, don't be
and thoroughly
thanking him.
reaching out to TIAC.
Oh,
That was
Jesus. See
one of
how
my
she
main
sold us out?
concerns as to why I couldn't move forward this last month. Was
You
I
gave.
just
She
felt
got 2 weeks
process felt
later.
a little too rushed, and we didn't
A
have,
little too rushed,
a lot
and
of
she's
community
actually
voices,
saying that the 2
having enough
weeks
time to take a
later
look
was
at this.
somehow
So,
more effective.
So thank you, John.
That's
and
such
team
bull.
for,
You're such
for
a.
doing that.
Sorry,
and
Kathy,
I
you
just
lost
hope
me
that moving
completely.
forward, we can continue to.
I thought you were
prioritize
real. Now we know you're
communities',
not. At least we know that.
experiences and voices when we're making big decisions like this. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
All
I
right.
wanted to add.
And it will
And given
pass.
those concerns and issues that have been brought out today, those will be addressed, I presume, hopefully, within the 30 days, if this is
What issues were brought up?
Do you mean like the card issue?
the card issue, the fact that we want to make sure that we have more or less a PR campaign that's going to alert the public as to
Another
what we're
fucking
doing.
PR campaign.
And something that's probably, basic, but at the same time, do we have some language somewhere that says that I should retain my receipt or proof of purchase when I get my fare receipt? And
The proof of fare
is it multilingual?
I believe
yeah,
it is.
this
the
is
proof
all
of fare
window
is-
dressing.
Is required is in all of our vehicles as well. But for example, what we can do and what we're starting to do as part of the low-income fare enrollment, which is over 1,000 folks a month, is give them information about rules for riding. So they get this card that makes it easier for them to use
Rules
the
for
system.
riding,
They need to
rules
understand
for
what
paying,
other
rules,
there are for riding.
rules.
So that same
Submit to your
information will go out to
masters.
these dozen, but also
You know, I
another
wouldn't
90
use
nonprofits we
Trimet
work
just
with.
because of this
So
kind.
we
I
can-
have a
we can
free
do
pass and I
it
don't
in
use
90
Trimet.
30 days to get
Because
ready.
I don't
So
want
just
to. I'm
people
not
sort of
participating in the
re-educate
police
or
state
re-inform,
shit.
here's the
Okay,
rules for riding, and
I don't have.
should
I'm
be
not
safe and
forced
to where you
to.
gotta go, but proof of fare is required.
But they do a lot of things that are just evil,
you.
in my opinion.
I would just simply like to add one of the messages that came through in previous TIAC meetings that I think is.
Well, I'm
in the
not going to
spirit
continue this because
of
we already
comments
know
here that
how
Director
it
Representative
passes
Dwyer bringing
unanimously.
are
So,
that,
and
and,
these people, we've
by
seen
and large,
enough.
I think is in